Okay, so for the 9/11 Tribute Flag project, what we have here is the design has been carved out of the linoleum block, and then we print it onto some archival Rising Stonehenge paper, which is then signed by the artists if they're available. And then those prints we will give to the families. That is their gift, along with the block. We also will encourage folks to put the name of the person that they're making the tribute for and their name as well on the block as well, so there's always a record of who did the block and who this block was made for. This block hasn't been set up yet, but I can show you. Here is one that was made, and it was for Bradley Fetchett, and the artist is Dan Cottrell. So when you carve your block, it would be good to put that information on the block for a permanent record. Print is made after we've carved the block, and now the final part of the project is to then make the tribute flag, which is then done on muslin that we print, and then we sew up with the backing, and then we make a casing for it to string on a strand, and there we have the final design printed. The name of the person we are honoring is hand painted very neatly on the bottom, and in some cases, but some people requested, some artists requested that we put the title of the piece on the top or somewhere. Other times, some artists would request that there were certain text, sort of quotes or information that they would like painted on the flag as well. So those alterations can be done to the final flag, and if the person has the ability to, some of them will even paint and design on the flag with color. So there were a few of those done as well in this project. So that is the final product that's going to come out of your carved linoleum print. And then I will show you how to carve, the process of carving and transferring the design onto the lino block as well. Okay, for the Lino Cut project, we will be sending you a block like this in a variety of dimensions, sizes, that will be pre-inked. But in case you may want to start or have special linoleum yourself and start with your Lino Cuts there, and you need to ink it, what we do is we take waterproof Higgins ink, and we then apply it to our lino. And I like to take a sponge and rub it in. And once I rub that in, I have a nice black inked block, and that I will set aside to dry. And when it's dry, it'll be ready to work on. Now, you have researched the person that you're creating for, and what I've done here is I have drawn out my idea on a piece of paper the size of my block. So, as you can see, they match well. I drew out a leaf, and I wrote the word love. You'll notice that the word has to be written backwards because it must be transferred backwards. All right? If you do not transfer it backwards, you're going to have a problem, because when we print it, it will then print backwards. It's going to print the reverse. Now I'm going to transfer my idea onto some very transparent tracing paper. That's the first step that we do for transfer. So I'm taking that design. It's the same size as the block. I'm transferring my what I want to carve out. I'm tracing my design idea. I'm tracing the lines. Now I'll go and transfer and trace. I like to do everything with lettering backwards from the get-go, so that when we go to transfer onto the block, it will be as it should be, because a lot of the time people will say, I'm going to flip it, and then they realize that the design and where the words fall don't quite work out. So just from the very beginning, do it backwards. All right? Okay, I've successfully transferred this design onto the tracing paper. Now, if I want to work out some design ideas, I could put it on a piece of black paper and play with it on black paper, transfer it there. But I'm going to go straight to the block. I feel confident with this design that I can work with it straight on the block. So to transfer it onto the block, I'll take 2 pieces of tape and create a hinge like this. And you want to make it as easy as possible to transfer. So there's my hinge. Then in your packet you'll receive transfer paper. It's white like this, and if you need to buy more, this is the transfer paper we are using. So we mark this side up on our transfer paper that we give you to indicate that this is the side that will face up, because the other side is the side with the powdery substance that will transfer the design. So this side is facing up, so there it goes up. I fold this over and take another piece of tape and I anchor it down like this. I take my pencil now and I go ahead and transfer the design straight on to the block. And I'm pressing fairly firmly on the surface. And see, now I don't have any worries. My text, the word I created, is being transferred properly, which is backwards. So that will be great, because when I go to print, when we print it, it'll print the right way. Then I go ahead and I remove the tape. And there is my design. So now what I can do, you will find some white pencils. And remember when I said earlier, you could transfer the design onto black paper to play around with your ideas before you go to the block. We'll send you some of those as well if you want to try different ideas on black paper. So I'm going to do that. Now, what this tells me when I visually look at this is those are the areas white I'm going to carve out. If you decide you change your mind about something and you don't want it to be white, then you can take a kneaded eraser. So let's say originally I want to carve out this shape here. So I'm going to take my white pencil and make it just a little thicker in the white area. And let's say we don't want to stick with just a thin little line for the design. We're working with black and white. So it would be interesting to stylize the line and give it a nice line quality that is a mix of perhaps thick and thin lines. As you can see, the more white I start to add to the piece, the more it starts to take on a little more movement and the design can become more dynamic. So I take my white pencil and I use it to sort of guide where I want to remove white. Now, as I'm working, I'll decide, okay, what if I wanted like maybe these kinds of style lines too for this leaf design? But then I decided, no, I really don't want that. I changed my mind. Okay, I can always take a kneaded eraser, which we will throw that in as well, and remove, because you're working with a pastel pencil, so it's going to be fairly easy to adjust that. So if you decide, well, I don't really want my leaf to look like this, I'm going to change the design line, you can come in with your pencil, your eraser, and you can go ahead and make the adjustment. So this is a medium that is really nice and forgiving, and it allows you the time to sort of think about how you want to structure your design. And let's say I change my mind again. I don't too much black. I've got a lot of black going on the outside. So I'm taking away this. I don't really want it to be white. I'd prefer it, the line to be black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do this outline. The sort of vein in the leaf will become black. And then the other little pieces that are in the leaf, also suggestions of those veins, will be black. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the reverse of what I just done. And instead, I'm going to plan on cutting out white here. And filling all of this will all be cut away. So now I'm going to do the reverse and say, instead of black in there, I want this to be white. And I'm going to fill in and see what that might look like. And see if I prefer that over having it a black leaf with some white veins. And because it's surrounded by a lot of black space, this could be a better option. As I'm working and I'm filling in, there's a lot of dust that collects, so I just need to tap that off and get it out of the way. And as I'm working, I can also take a marker pen and put black marker pen on those areas. So what we have here is I filled in the white, because before with the black and just white lines, it didn't seem as interesting to me as removing more white because there's a lot of black space. Now, as I'm working, I really want to make sure I don't take away the black that I intend to leave. So I can also take my marker pen and even go over the areas that need to stay very black and kind of put that back in. And that's really, I find that to be very helpful when I'm carving. And so this creates a little more of a dynamic design to me. Now, at this point, I can also say that the words I want to stand out more, so at this point I can also decide how thick I want my lettering, or do I want to create a font, and that can be done as well. Letters are a little challenging to carve out when they're really tiny, so I do suggest that if you do text or lettering, to make it rather large, so that you won't be struggling with cutting them out, so that when we print them, we can easily read them. So at this point, this is where I can say, do I want this? Do I want a very block style? Do I want to change the font? And as you saw earlier, it's easy to erase and reconstruct. So that's, now I'm looking at the design, and at this point I can take my pencil and say, would I like to have some repetition of line that I want to cut out to add to this? Do I want to try to experiment with something like that? Maybe create more repetition of line into something fun? Do I want to go off into the space? Do I want to come back into the space and continue my repetition? This is the part that's fun to create. Do I want to repeat curved lines maybe? I find this part a lot of fun to design in this manner, very organic. Do I want to put another leaf in this position perhaps? Or do I want to create a border part way through? There's still a lot of designing left to do in this black space. So that's something you can play with as you go. If I decide, well, I change my mind on this side, no problem. I can go ahead and change this side and say, okay, I want to imagine that my line here came underneath and it continues here like this, and then it repeats, and I got a thing going like that. And then I would like to finish this off as if it were going in like this. And so as you can see now, the simple shape, once I add other design lines around and I repeat them, I can have more movement in the design and a lot of interest. You're working with a lot of black, so you want to pull in your white to really make that pop it's going to be on a cloth and we're going to stand at a distance to see it. So you want to make sure that you create design that pulls our eye up to it. So that's done. Now comes the fun part, and that would be the carving of the block. So what I have are my tools. And my tools consist of linoleum cutters. There are other types of linoleum cutters that you could use as well. These are the basic. So what I have is a number 1 tip to carve out very thin lines, but we really don't work with that so much. We usually start with a number 2. It carves deeper and wider. And here's a number 3, and the higher the number, the bigger the amount it will take out. And then this little guy is a blade that I'm going to show you how that's used as well. Okay, so design has been transferred. You've designed on the block. You're satisfied with what you have. So here's the great thing. You can take your time on this. You don't need to rush. You don't have to wait for paint to dry or things to shift and change. So this is a very wonderful medium. Now, I have a board like this to hold my design in place while I'm working on it. Creates a nice shelf here for me to press against. You may not have this. In that case, if you're working on a surface where you don't have something to anchor, you'll have to hold your block down and cut. It's very important, though, when you're cutting and you're holding your tool and you're cutting, that you never put your hand or your fingers in front of the tool, because obviously if you slip and that goes into your finger, that could really be a problem and it will hurt. So let's be safe. Keep your hands always behind and always never in front of the blade. Okay? If you're fortunate to have one of these anchoring boards, that would be great. So now I'm going to cut the design. I'm going to start to cut. So I'm going to anchor and I'm going to hold my plate in place. I'm holding my tool, and actually I'm going to go to a bigger tool. The one is usually never used here. I'm holding my tool with my hands in a nice firm grip like this. I'm going to cut, and the angle, it's important that the angle not be too high and too sharp, then you kind of can't gouge down and get a good flow. It can't be too shallow, because if it's too shallow you slip and you have over cuts. So we want to keep it kind of at 45-degree angle here. This is kind of a good angle right here. Do you see that angle? That's kind of the angle that works really well for carving. I'm going to gently push down and start to go along my design line edge. And because in this design I intend to take out a lot of white, I'm going to start by taking out the perimeter of the design there. One thing about taking out white and cutting on a lino block, or if you're doing wood cuts, is the direction of cut when you go to cut the white inside is very important, because it can suggest movement in your design as well. So I'm going to go ahead now and cut the edge where this was my black area. So I'm going to cut the edge there as well, get that established. Because when I go into the design and I start to cut, now look, I'm coming around an area that's turning. I'm not going to angle. This is awkward. This feels comfortable, this angle. So what I'll do is I angle my block as I go. Remember, angle the block to where your hand that's carving feels comfortable. So there is the next cut. Now my intention is to remove all this white, but one of the beautiful things about linoleum block cutting is texture. And so as I cut away, I have a direction that goes up with the veins of the sleeve. I'm going to cut away in the big spaces in the same sort of direction, so that my lino carving will have little chip marks that are directional in the same direction and will give the linoleum cut a lovely texture. So here I go, cutting away, and as I work, I don't cut all of the linoleum away in the white spaces. I leave a little bit to see if I like the texture it's creating for me. And that way I will know oh, there's some nice chip marks. I don't want to take those away. They give the cut and the design some nice expression, so I'm going to leave them for texture. Those, when I go to print them, could be quite lovely. So I always say, leave some of your carving chip marks when you're doing white. It can be striking in the design. And don't take everything completely away, but leave some chip marks. They add texture, they add character. That is what linoleum cutting is all about. Now I'm leaving that black, I'm leaving this black, so I'm not cutting those away. But as I would cut, I would leave these as black, and they would stand out and they'd print as black in the design, and then around them they'd have a little bit of those little marks that make them look very printerly. So I spoke to you about this blade here, and he's used for channeling and for very intricate cut areas. So I'm going to show you now how that sort of works. As you can see, I have a very curved design here, and that's going to be a little bit of a challenge to cut. So to help me, I'm going to create what is called a channel first to guide my blade. So what I do is I take the tip of this, I put it down into my design, and I just sort of drag it in the line of the design like this. It's straight up and down. I'm not carving anything away. I'm just putting a channel into the design that's very, very circular. Okay, so now I've carved that into my block there. I've created a nice channel. If I put my finger down, I can feel the channel. I'm going to take my blade and I'm going to go ahead and run it on that design line. And because I have sort of pre-prepped that line with the other tool, my blade will have a tendency to follow it. See, I'm turning the block as I go. Don't try to do any awkward carving. Just turn the block as you go. You're in control of the block. Don't let the block control you. And so that was easy enough done because I channeled it out, so it created a nice groove for my blade to follow. So that is how those very tight areas can be done with this blade, creating a channel for you. Now, when you're working in linoleum, there are things you can do like creating textures. So you may want little texture marks. There are various ways. I'm going to demonstrate in this space here how you can create textures with the point, but also for a border. So what I have here is, if you were cutting away a lot of white to your design, there are different types of borders you may want to put, just so that when we roll the roller, we have a border that stabilizes the roller so we can ink it properly. You could carve out a nice border in any kind of pattern you would like. You could create a textured border, and these look really nice for things like designs that incorporate nature, floral designs, trees. They have a suggestion of bark almost. So textured borders are nice. They create a border. Very linear border would be maybe notching it out like this, but even evenly spaced notches are nice. But one could also group the notches into groups as well. And so there are many different types of borders, a straight line. You can be as creative with it as much as you like with your border. So I'm going to show you how to do the notch border. So let's say I would like to create a notch border. It's very simply done. I take a number 2 or number 3 and I decide where I want to start. If it's here, then I just gouge it out like this. So I'm pushing the blade in and pushing out to the end. Now if you want a wider border, then I'm jumping now to the number 3 here, so that was a 2. And you can even change like thick and thin if you wanted to do that. So you'll see this notches it out like this. And that's an even thicker notch. So that's an easy to create border just by taking the tip. Now let's say I'd like some texture. For a little dot type of texture, you could take the number 1 and notch out your linoleum. And this gives you this sort of texture. And we use this like sometimes in flowers, they have little texture or fuzzy textures. We'll use this little notcher. I've used this with creating stars in the night sky. So this is kind of a fun one to, create. You can create little texture like this. And you can even do the same thing with the bigger guys. So if you use the bigger guy and notch it out, you can have that kind of texture. If I was doing animals, I sometimes notch out texture with furs and that sort of thing. So you can create nice texture in a stippling kind of texture in your design as well with this. You can also just do short strokes that lift out like this. When you're doing things that sparkle, you may want to take your blade and do this and go out with it like that. And those can add, like, sometimes they do this on, that's something like something that's sparkly and it's going to radiate, and they like to take the cutter and do this kind of mark. I like to switch it around and use different size cutters, so I mix the thinner blade with a thicker blade to get a variety of cut marks in my design, and that creates a little more dynamic black and white contrast. If you use this number 1 cutter, that's this guy, we rarely use it, but if you're going to use it at all, it's really important that when you use it, when I cut a mark with it, it needs to be deep enough so that I can feel that it's been cut. Lots of folks will use this and not cut deep enough, but when you notch with this, you can make some really neat marks like this, but they have to be deep enough so that when we go to print, they don't fill up with ink. We don't really use this to cut lines. They're way too shallow with the number 1. These are used more for these kind of marks, and if you cut any thin lines, they have to be deep. Okay, I think I've covered everything now for linoleum printmaking. Once you finish your block, it will look, it'll have everything carved out, and you'll send it to us and we will print it for you on a piece of cloth and the archival papers. So here are some examples of some blocks that have been carved. This one, as you notice, a lot of white has been taken away. And so it's really important when you take a lot of white away that you leave a border. It is very difficult to print on a design where all the white's taken away and there's no border. We have to roll ink on this, so we really need the border. As you can see, there's some chip marks that showed up in the design, which is fine. This is printmaking, so we want sometimes those marks to show up. This is a good design where the leaf with the veins, the 3 pathways, are cut away and white was revealed. However, chip marks are predominantly throughout this design, which is great. Again, those will show up in the print and they're nice. They give it a lovely texture. Here's a design where they left the border on this end and this end. They've taken a lot of white away, but you can see a ton of chip marks left in, so that when we went to print, we have this solid design, border, and then lovely texture from the chip marks left by the artist. And then finally, those were vertical designs, but I do have a horizontal example as well. And once again, she took a lot of white away and left a nice thin border for us, so we were able to roll it well. And as you can see, this is a sun design with a burst. And it's really important when you do those sunbursts to have lines that really extend out and take a lot of white away to suggest that light in the design. She does have some thinner lines here that are part of the coastline, and they show up really lovely, but the nice balance of dark space and light space is really good in this design when printed. And most importantly, don't forget that border is really important when we're going to print it. And finally, all designs, as I mentioned earlier, blocks should have who it was written for, who it was created for, and then the artist's name. In this case, the artist put her age, and I believe that would be the date she created this. So have fun with your printmaking process. I hope the video was helpful to you. We really look forward to then printing it on paper and creating a flag for the person that you are honoring. And welcome aboard our community, and we hope to see you in the future sometime.